Michelle Martinko had grown up hearing in family albums she appears first as this almost impossibly cherished little girl, always held a little closer, always watched a little more carefully, as if everyone around her understood how fragile. When she was 12, her world narrowed to the hard outline of metal and plastic as doctors diagnosed her with scoliosis. They strapped a brace to her body that ran from her neck to her hips. She retreated inward, suddenly hyper-aware of how she moved, how she sat, how people looked at her. For a while, the miracle baby felt more. It happened to be the era of Farrah Fawcett, feathered hair and big waves, and Michelle's long blonde hair was perfect for that look. She leaned into it. Not by her senior year, Michelle had woven herself into the fabric of Kennedy High School in quiet but meaningful ways. She sat, the big hair, the bright smile, the soft confidence. She was the kind. Somewhere between the clatter of dishes and the buzz of teenage conversation, someone snapped a mental picture of her as she smiled across a table. Only 2 months old, the mall was still a novelty, its polished floors and bright storefronts drawing crowds of teenagers who, to anyone watching her walk through the mall that night, she would have looked like any other high. Storefront gates rattled halfway shut, last announcements echoed over the PA system, and clusters of teenagers drifted toward the exits in loose, laughing groups. Michelle crossed paths with friends who had also been there that night. Michelle tucked the money back into her purse, unaware that whether she flashed it or not, her fate had already begun to close in around her. What most people didn't see that night was the shift in her mood. In 1979, in a Midwestern city that still believed in its own safety, the idea seemed dramatic, almost paranoid. The mall parking lot, brightly lit from a distance, felt like neutral territory, not a hunting ground. Shortly before 10 o'clock, her Buick was parked farther out, not in the closest spot, but not in a forgotten corner either. Just another car in a place where no one expected horror to unfold. Most likely, she opened the driver's door, slipped behind the wheel and pulled it shut with the familiar thump that always sounds louder in an empty lot. Somewhere within those few seconds, between the engine turning over and the car moving, a shadow crossed. The attack was immediate and ferocious, a flurry of motion and steel inside a cramped compartment where her hands and arms bore cuts that told their own silent story. She had grabbed for the knife, tried to push him away, refused to go quietly. When news of Michelle's murder broke, the shock rippled through Cedar Rapids with surgical speed. Parents who had let their daughters roam the mall freely now stared at them as if seeing them for the first time. Fragile. They had a rule to follow, one forged by experience. Start with the people closest to the victim, especially the men. Almost immediately, the name on everyone's lips was Andy Seidel. Friends remembered how he wanted to know where she was, who she was with, why she had chosen a particular person to. Where had he been that night? Who could verify it? His answer came down to something that felt both comforting and. For a long time, that tension hung in the air. The investigation, technically without enough. Detectives showed him the crime scene photos, laying out in front of him the brutal reality of what had been done to someone he had once held close. He described friends, classmates, acquaintances. They were all quietly measured, weighed against the brutality of the crime. Even those who had clear alibis felt the sting of being looked at. The story that formed in the minds of many residents was simple and neat, the kind that provides comfort even while it terrifies. A jealous ex-boyfriend, a random killer, a stranger with no connection to her at all was a far darker idea, because if that were true, then no one was safe anywhere, ever. The mall parking lot, once so vivid in everyone's minds, slowly returned to being just a place to park and shop. What remained were stacks of paper, interview transcripts, crime scene photos, typed reports with margins scribbled full of questions. Inside the police station, the files slid deeper into the shelves reserved for unsolved cases. Outside, people adjusted to living with an absence instead of a suspect. For Michelle's family, every December 19th, the city's uneasy truce with its own unsolved crime was shattered again, as local news stations aired segments about Michelle. For younger viewers, it became a kind of ghost story rooted in reality. The girl from their parents' generation who went to the mall and never came home. In one Cedar Rapids household, those yearly broadcasts. His son, Matt, grew up with the story of Michelle Martinko, less as local legend and more as a quiet, persistent presence. Her parents aged under the weight of unanswered questions, their miracle child frozen at 18 in their memories. Janelle, her older sister, carried on with marriage and adulthood, But every milestone, holiday in Cedar Rapids, the murder of Michelle Martinko became a reference point for fear. When people talked about how safe the city was, for many, Michelle's story blurred over time, but the lesson they drew from it did not. Evil had visited once, which meant it could visit again. The case all it needed was someone willing to open the box again and ask the same old questions with new tools in hand. In 2005, when the rest of the world had largely filed Michelle Martinko's murder away as a tragic, now decades later, he sat alone with a mountain of paper and a question that had never stopped. Somewhere deep in that stack, Larison found something that shouldn't have been as quiet as it was. A lab report about blood scrapings taken from the car's gear shift. Years before, another detective had sent those. In 1979, that detail would have meant very little. In 2005, it was a loaded gun just waiting for someone to pull the trigger. He didn't stop at the gear shift. Larison ordered Michelle's dress, preserved for decades in an evidence log. Once again, the profile was male. Once again, it matched the DNA from the gear shift. 2 separate stains, 2 separate surfaces, 1 unknown man. For the first, if Michelle's killer had ever been caught for another serious crime, his DNA might already be sitting in that system, waiting to be linked to the past. The profile was sent. If CODIS couldn't give them a name, then Larison decided to build his own miniature database. He went back to the people who had been young and close to Michelle in 1979 and started asking them for something deeply personal, a DNA sample. Each sample went off to the lab. Each result came back with the same message, not the guy. Among those samples was the one that quietly rewrote years of suspicion, the DNA from Andy Siddell. When his DNA was compared to the profile from the dress and the gear shift, the result was unequivocal. It didn't match. Whatever else Andy had been in Michelle's story, By the time Detective Matt Denlinger took over the case in 2015, he inherited not only his father's unfinished work, but also a file that contained something both powerful. Matt stared at the profile and asked the question every cold case detective eventually reaches: what else can this DNA tell us? The answer would come from a place that sounded more like speculative fiction than standard police procedure. To a detective with no face to match to his suspect, it was like being told a ghost might be able to draw its own portrait. Matt sent the DNA profile from Michelle's case to Parabon, hoping for something. Parabon provided age-adjusted variations, different hairstyles, different slight tweaks, but the core remained the same. The Cedar Rapids Police Department held a press conference and unveiled the snapshot images, letting cameras and reporters carry them into living rooms all over Iowa. The response was, the problem wasn't that the portrait was wrong, it was that it was too right for too many people. Matt felt the same old frustration creeping in, the sense that they were circling around something big without ever being able to land. Then, in 2018, a story broke from the opposite side. Investigators in that case hadn't relied on CODIS. Instead, they had uploaded crime scene DNA to a public genealogy website used by ordinary people to explore their family trees. They hadn't found the killer directly. If CODIS couldn't find Michelle's killer among criminals, maybe a consumer genealogy site could find him among curious hobbyists, and they could use the existing sample and upload it to a public database like GEDmatch, where users voluntarily shared their genetic information. This time, they wouldn't be looking for a perfect match. When Parabon uploaded the unknown profile from Michelle's case into GEDmatch, they weren't expecting lightning to strike in the form of a perfect match. Instead, it said something subtler but just as powerful. Here is a woman who shares a significant amount of DNA with your unknown man. Her name was Brandy Jennings, living in Vancouver, Washington. She had never imagined that her genetic code would someday be used as a bridge between a cold case in Iowa and a man who had stayed hidden for nearly 40 years. When investigators contacted her, they traced her lineage back to great-great-grandparents, then outward to all the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren that followed. They combed through public records, birth certificates. As they worked, other relatives identified through GEDmatch, and consumer tests agreed to share their DNA as well. Each new sample refined. He belonged to a specific family line. Somewhere in this forest of names, there had to be a man who had lived in or near Iowa in 1979. Eventually, the branches narrowed down to a particular line, a family with roots in Iowa and several male descendants of the right age. Parabon recalibrated their analysis and came back with a stunning conclusion. And statistically, one of them was almost certainly the man whose blood had stained Michelle's dress and the Buick's gear shift. For Matt, the moment was electrifying and sobering at the same time. But science alone couldn't choose which brother it was. To answer that final, crucial question, the investigation would have to step out of the world of chance. They couldn't walk up to each man and ask for a DNA swab without risking rumors spreading through the family, giving the guilty one time to panic, to run, or to lawyer up before they were ready. Instead, they decided to follow. The first brother to be tested never saw it coming. Officers followed him at a distance as he went about something as ordinary as grabbing lunch. They watched him drink from a straw, laugh with someone across the table. The man had simply gone out to eat. He had no idea that a small plastic tube now carried the key to his genetic identity into the hands of investigators. For the second brother, the opportunity came from the most forgettable place imaginable. To anyone else, it was worthless waste. To the lab technicians who received it, it was a direct line to the man's DNA, a way to compare his genetic code to the profile from the dress and the Buick without ever having to touch his. He drank at least 2 sodas, each one leaving traces of his DNA on the rim of the glass and the straw he used. When he left, the surveillance didn't end. The first brother was eliminated. His DNA didn't match the profile from Michelle's case. The second brother, too, was not a match. With 2 out of 3 ruled out, the pressure focused. The odds of it belonging to anyone else were astronomically low. 1 in 100 billion, the expert said. Only then did Matt truly look at Jerry. But what made Jerry such a disturbing suspect wasn't just the way his DNA fit the crime. It was the way his life didn't. He had no. For nearly 40 years, while Michelle's family mourned and detectives stared at the same unsolved file, Jerry Burns had been living what appeared to be an ordinary life. He had gone to work, attended school. He was Jerry Lynn Burns, and it was time for him to be confronted with what the science said he had done. Detective Matt Denlinger chose his moment with almost theatrical precision. On December 19, 2018, exactly 39 years to the day, he carried with him not just the confidence of the DNA results, but the weight of his father's generation and the city that had been waiting for answers since before he was born. He spoke of the unknown male DNA found on the gearshift of Michelle's car, the blood on her dress, the profile preserved for decades. Then he explained how that profile had been matched, through genealogy and discarded items, directly to Jerry. But he claimed he couldn't remember being there on the night of the murder. When Matt pressed, asking how his DNA could possibly have ended up inside the car and on Michelle's clothing if he had never crossed her path, Jerry drifted into vague territory. Eventually, the conversation ended not with a confession but with an arrest. Jerry Burns was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Michelle Martinko. But those murmured thoughts, combined with the genetic evidence, became one more piece. The courtroom filled with faces from different eras of the same story, young reporters who had grown up hearing about Michelle. On the other sat Jerry's family, convinced that the man they knew as a devoted father and hard-working businessman could not be. Expert witnesses explained the science in painstaking detail, emphasizing the improbability of random contamination and the astronomical. To them, the story was clear. He was in that car. He called a molecular biologist who testified about DNA. He painted the state's narrative as an improbable chain of events. A married man drives to a mall miles away with gloves and a knife, kills a stranger, and then goes home to his family without leaving any trace except a few drops of blood. Instead, after only about 3 hours, the jurors announced they had reached a verdict. As they filed back into the room and the foreperson stood, the air went razor-sharp. The words that followed were simple. The verdict did not bring anyone back, and it didn't erase 4 decades of pain. But for Michelle's sister Janelle and the dwindling number of. At home, they pulled out old photographs, not just the ones that had been shown on the news, but private snapshots. Michelle asleep with her dog, laughing with messy hair, caught mid-blink at a family gathering. It was proof that persistence could reach across. Between them stretched a chain of effort that yet even as the city exhaled, another question slipped in around the edges. Was this really the only time? During his interview with Matt, Jerry had casually mentioned the name Jody Huisentrut, a blonde news anchor who vanished near her car. Officially, no evidence has surfaced to link Jerry to Jody. His DNA hasn't been tied to her case, and police in Mason City have kept their cards close to their chest. Maybe Jerry was a man who made one horrific choice on one winter night and then spent the rest of his life burying it. Maybe there were other victims whose names we don't yet know, other families stuck in the first half of the story. Her refusal to give up in that front seat, the way she fought her attacker, likely caused him to cut himself. Those tiny drops of his blood, mingled with hers on the gear shift and her dress, became time capsules sealed inside an evidence locker for decades. Today, when people in Cedar Rapids speak Michelle's name, they no longer have to end the sentence with a question mark. Her murder pushed investigators to embrace new technology, to experiment with genetic genealogy, to think of DNA not just as a match or no-match tool, but as a map